there's no coherent reason folks who agree about abortion or agree about Israel should also agree about youth gender dysphoria. It's a very complicated subject, and it's not an easy left or right wing one. You could just as easily make left wing arguments against youth transition in some cases. I think unfortunately what's happened is because we're so much more dysfunctionally politically and so much more polarized, that makes everything harder. And what's happened in countries that are a little bit less polarized or a lot less polarized, like Sweden and Finland, is their sort of national healthcare systems have taken close looks at the data on youth transition and have said, this data is not good. It's low quality data. And as a result, they've really scaled back access to puberty blockers and hormones, which is easier to do in a national healthcare setting than it is here, where it's a little bit of the Wild West. So I can't say for sure that they made the right decision, but clearly that tells us something. If they're expressing caution on this stuff, and there's similar stuff that's happened in the UK and to a lesser extent in France, and one organization that covers psychiatrists in Australia and New Zealand, all of them are saying we need to put on the brakes a little because we just don't really know that these treatments work as well as has been claimed.
Hey now, it's your boy PSA Sitch here with another Tuesday show with everyone's favorites. I didn't think of a title for you today.
That's okay.
Drama stir, pot stir.
A little bit, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. Today we're joined by the famous, horrible transphobe Jesse.
So Thank you.
Don't open that way. People will actually believe
sorry. Why
you.
don't you introduce yourself? You could probably do a better job introducing yourself than I could.
Yeah, I'm a famous transphobe. Also happen to be a journalist. I was at New York Magazine for a while. I wrote a book called The Quick Fix, and I've written about like a lot of psychology debunking stuff, but also mostly because of a story I had in the Atlantic in 2018. I've gotten dragged into, or not dragged into. I hurled myself into the.
Poor choice of words considering today's topic.
That's true. I was gonna drag. I was going to there's stuff about trans kids, when they should transition, what the protocol should look like. That's mostly the sort of part of this debate I've researched a little bit, because like science writing is sort of in my background. So there's been some Twitter controversy over it.
What's your overall take on the trans kids issue?
I just think little boys should play sports and should have short hair. I get really angry.
And wear suits to school. Yeah.
little boy suits. I really do it. I think it's legitimately complicated. My main frustration, especially in recent years, is to the number of otherwise credible people with impressive credentials pretending that it's not actually a big deal and a big decision to put kids on blockers and hormones. And I still think the average Obama liberal normie understands it is a big deal. But there's been this movement in journalism and in activism to pretend that we already have the answers to some questions that are actually pretty fraught and complicated. And I'm sort of horny for complexity and horny for nuance. So maybe that's why I'm drawn to this issue.
Based. Do you think that the majority of the Obama liberals are just being cowed into silence out of fear?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, because like I hear from them, they email me. I think there's been an improvement in the way mainstream outlets have covered this. There was just a really long story in the New York Times Magazine that allowed some complexity in, which is great.
That's
Emily
good.
Bazelon, folks should check that out. So I think things are getting better, but I just think like my experience after writing this article 4 years ago, which it was an article that included like very positive portrayals of kids who had transitioned. It was not anti-transition, but just even saying that maybe some kids shouldn't, or maybe sometimes, kids think they should transition because of trauma or because of internalized homophobia. It was crazy. It was a much crazier pile-on than I'd experienced when I was like, they splashed my mug on the front page of Breitbart once because they were mad at me, and that was nothing compared to this. So it's different when it's like coming from your tribe. I think you guys probably know that.
Of course, yeah. Well, we're tribeless now, so
Tribeless, yes. Yeah.
there you go. We're wandering the desert with you, but so I feel like there's so much information about the blockers. Has there been any long-term studies on the safety of using hormone blockers basically forever this way?
Yeah, so basically, and I should say like the endocrinology is not my super specialty, but basically they've been used for a while in cases of precocious puberty, and they're considered like safe-ish there, although even there's some concerns, and like if you're a kid you can't be on them for that long because they'll mess up your bone health. But if you go on blockers and then you go off them and then your natal puberty takes over, like if you're natal male, then you go through male puberty, that's a totally different use case from your natal male. You go on blockers, you go off blockers, you take estrogen. And there's almost no study in the long term of kids who started blockers very young and then proceeded to cross-sex hormones. And there's multiple reasons for concern. We don't know what it does to brain development. I'm getting that straight from the Endocrine Society, which is pretty pro blockers in general.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what happens in cases where kids aren't being monitored closely. There was a big scandal in Sweden that made their national broadcaster did sort of a whistleblowing documentary where Karolinska Hospital in Sweden, there was a 15-year-old who basically had osteoporosis or a closely related condition because she got such negligent care. There was a handful of other cases covered up of kids who went on blockers who were subsequently suicidal, who had other major physical health defects. So there's a genuine medical controversy here, and all I ask is for, science writers and activists to just acknowledge that. It could be that blockers are good for some kids, but there's some unknowns.
Mm-hmm. And in the last 20 years, are blockers new, or did 20 years ago when people were transitioning, did they put them on blockers first? I guess they didn't, because it was mostly adults back then, right?
Yeah, blockers used in this way, early 21st century, basically, sometime in the aughts. They started with the Dutch were the first to do it, then they brought it over here. They've been used much longer than that for precocious puberty, but again, that's just a different situation.
That's just temporary, isn't it? Just a couple of years or so?
Yeah. You can't be on them much longer than it depends, but 2 years-ish is considered around the cap.
When people transition, do they stop taking the puberty blockers once they start taking cross-sex, or do they? Yeah,
you switch to cross hormones. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I mean, my feeling about the whole thing is, I think, gender dysphoria is real. I think it's probably something people are born with.
Yeah.
It feels to me that this massive explosion of people who think they have gender dysphoria or think they're trans is probably overblown, and there's probably going to be this wave of trans regret in the next 10 years, 5 or 10 years or so, of just, it seems like there's this, it's becoming trendy basically for lots of kids, especially for young girls, to think that they're transgender. And I don't think the doctors are doing their due diligence to really try to figure out whether the kids are trans or not.
So this is what we'll get. I mean, you guys are fine. What with being your tribalistness, yes. But no, this is what gets you in trouble. Everyone agrees there's a large uptick in kids who seek out hormones and blockers, and part of that is surely societal acceptance. The same way,
sure,
as being gay became more accepted, you saw more kids coming out as gay. That doesn't mean there was social contagion with being gay, although I think there actually was a little bit. Everyone knows people who dabble, which is fine.
Yeah.
The line among liberals and leftists is that this is, when you look at these graphs that really go up, that this is all societal acceptance, that there's no element of social contagion here. I'm skeptical of that simply because I cannot think of any other area of a 12-year-old's life or a 15-year-old's life where they're immune from peer influence and from social contagion. There's nothing that is just removed from peers and culture influence. I've also talked to kids who have very straightforwardly been like, yeah, everyone in my friend group was coming out as non-binary, so I came out as non-binary. Then I was asexual. Then I was a demi boy. Everyone, it's weird. It's this weird thing where everyone knows it's happening, and especially parents in, I think, mostly white affluent suburbs is where it's very much a thing, clusters of kids. But we need to put it in context because a lot of those kids aren't seeking out medical procedures. We should just be careful with the ones who are. Which, as I say this, I think it's pretty reasonable. But everything I'm saying now, can really get you pilloried in sort of respectable progressive circles.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's crazy about it, because it's I don't care if someone experiments with, being non-binary, they don't take any hormones or anything. It's okay, whatever, who cares? Yeah. Someone experiments with, being gay and then they realize they're not gay. It's okay, who cares? This doesn't matter. It's not going to create some physical impact on their body, presumably, going forward for the rest of their life that could, can be incredibly detrimental to them as an adult.
Well, and I would also extend that to say, at a certain point, we need to let adults do what they want. you know, 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds are still pretty young. They are legal adults. And the movement has been toward so-called informed consent clinics, where if they want hormones and or hormones, not blockers, so they can get them. I mean, I can see the argument for it. I would feel weird saying you, a legal adult, can't have this medical procedure you want, although there's some philosophical fuzziness there. But with kids, with a 12 or a 13-year-old, it is so different because they cannot either legally speaking, they can't give consent. They need their parents to, but also just like cognitively, think about you when you were 12 or 13. Could you make a medical decision that would have ramifications 15, 20, 30 years down the road? I definitely know I could not have. Yeah.
Well, I felt like I could. That's the problem. I felt like I was invincible. Yeah, exactly. Totally. I could jump right in.
Listen, I'm curious. Mom, if I eat ice cream every day for dinner, I'll be very healthy.
Exactly. That's the kind of attitude, that 12-year-old hubris, especially in boys. Oh my God. What does informed consent look like in this environment? That's like a huge question for me, because I see some of these people saying, oh yeah, it's all reversible. None of this can, you get your breasts removed and you just get new breasts when you feel the urge. It's like, what?
Yeah. There was, I mean, that sounds made up, but there was a very famous clinician who someone recorded her saying that, if the kids regret the breast removed, that's what implants are for. So people say puberty blockers are reversible. They're definitely more reversible than hormones, but the fact is we don't know how reversible they are. We know that if you stop taking them, your normal puberty will kick in. We don't know what they will do to your bone health in the long run. We don't know what they'll do to your cognitive development. So it pisses me off when people just say they're reversible, full stop. Because again, you're talking about kids. You're talking about 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds putting them on this medication, and people are being very flippant with words like safe and reversible that we can't yet say for sure. Informed consent, there's a detransitioner named Carrie Callahan. Folks should seek out her work. I think she pulled some of it offline, but you can find it archived. She argued that trans people are themselves being ripped off by the medical establishment. Because if you're a trans person and you show up for an informed consent clinic, they give you a big stack of paperwork. They say, you're confirming that you know the pluses and minuses and unknowns of these treatments. Sign your name. We'll give you your hormones. We'll give you your surgery. The problem is if then something goes wrong and you come back in a month or two and you're like, this is not working for me. This isn't going well. What the hell happened? They'll say, well, you signed the thing. You can't sue us. It's an indemnity situation. So I think there's an argument to be made that, like, alongside a decades-long sad history of the medical establishment failing trans people in other ways, including really shitty stuff like saying, we're not going to put you on estrogen unless you look hotter, unless you wear a dress, like really gender normative shitty stuff. And I don't know if you guys know the band Against Me, but Laura Jane Grace, who's their lead singer, and I've loved this band forever. She has a really good memoir about going through some of that. But I now think it's like sort of the pendulum swung in the other direction, where it's also not, you're not treating patients well if you're just like, yep, sign this thing, we'll give you whatever you want, and not. So I think in some clinical settings, there's probably like good, thoughtful, informed consent going on. I think oftentimes it's like, sign this, take your hormones, out the door. We're not going to help you if anything goes wrong.
What is your take on like the psychology around the trans issue? Because I know, Jordan Peterson has talked about in Canada there being affirmative only type policy that kind of binds psychologists into this situation where if they have someone come in and, maybe they're dabbling, like we've said, but they don't necessarily have gender dysphoria, it's really hard to, sift those out.
Yeah. I think especially in the US, like our healthcare system is a wild west in general, and there's more and more gender clinics opening. And I think the situation ranges from really good multidisciplinary gender clinics that are rare and might have long wait lists where kids get really good care, and they do ask questions like this, to just really bad clinics where they barely assess kids at all. So I think it totally depends on where you are geographically. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that if you're like a trans or a trans questioning kid in rural Mississippi, you probably have no options at all. So I think it ranges from that to if you're a trans kid in suburban Boston or in San Francisco, there's probably a lot of clinics who will get you hormones very quickly and maybe too quickly. But I just think this doesn't really lend itself to catchphrases. Like, it's not accurate to say that huge numbers of kids are getting hormones too easily, and it's not accurate to say that it's hard to get hormones everywhere in the country, because we're like 20 countries in one.
Yeah. For me, it really is about weeding out the false positives. But I mean, we're not really having that conversation politically about how we're probably creating a bunch of false positives. And like you say, if the kid's in like San Francisco or New York, it's like, okay, you're going to get a bunch of false positives there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for any other medication, you would want to make sure that they'll benefit from it, and that they can't. You wouldn't put someone on a powerful antidepressant without first making sure that like they couldn't get by with lifestyle changes and exercise and other stuff. And that kind of thinking is absent here because it's seen as gatekeeping or invalidating their identity. But I don't really see it as invalidating their identity. I don't think taking a medicine is an identity. I think you take a medicine to make yourself feel better, and it's the job of clinicians to make sure it'll make you feel better.
Yeah, I think having transgender be so associated with an identity as opposed to a medical issue that's really the key thing that's damaging the conversation. That's preventing us from being able to look at this critically, because then it just gets warped into like, oh, you're attacking my identity. It's like, well, I mean, we're just trying to make sure that you actually have gender dysphoria in the first place.
Yeah, and you've done some good stuff on this. There's a difference between being transgender, which the way it's defined these days is like, basically anyone who says they are is. And
right.
There's some internecine fighting over that, which we can skip over because it's complicated, but that's different from having gender dysphoria. And to me, the reason you go on hormones or blockers is if you have gender dysphoria, which is a thing that's in the DSM. And I think we need it to be in the DSM, because otherwise, what are the criteria for even putting someone on these powerful medications? Right. It's like way too easy to say like it shouldn't be pathologized. I mean, what's the alternative? We're just going to put 12 and 13-year-olds on blockers and hormones because they want them? That's not realistic.
No, yeah, that's a good point. Do you have a take on the what is a woman question?
Yeah,
oh no.
No, I mean, I think the incumbent definition of adult human female is fine as long as you follow that up with there are strong moral reasons to treat trans women as women.
Right.
Are they literally the same thing? No, nobody actually thinks that. And hardly anyone thinks that there's no places where there should be exceptions, like sports and prisons. You're actually very much in the minority view if you think that that's all it is. Trans women are women, full stop, no exceptions. Like, that's not a popular view, but because within media and within the subset of academia that's on Twitter, that's a very unpopular view. People are completely, it's this like pluralistic ignorance thing where they think that these are like radical right-wing positions when they're very widely held positions. So, yeah.
It seems like Twitter really fucks with everyone's head. It really skews everyone's perception of where the majority opinion is, because Twitter is so radicalized, it seems like, or extremified, I guess, in both directions, but a lot, especially on the left. And it's so outside of what the average person thinks.
Not just that, but like there's been issues within mainstream outlets, including ones that I've like written for, where they basically just recite the Twitter talking points.
Yeah, they take it as gospel.
Which is just like, what is the point of journalism? Like, if you're not going to question not dumb shit, but questionable shit on Twitter.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the real problem, is that it seems like journalists are the most obsessed with Twitter.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it makes sense because Twitter, you can get more information faster probably than any other place, but it's just such a polarized place that
it's like a quality versus quantity thing, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because I see so many YouTubers who and I guess this is just like a natural human reaction. Like, whatever people do and whatever environment they swim in, they spend most of their time in, they assume that's indicative of like the world. And I see so many YouTubers who get caught up in YouTube drama or Twitter, and they think like this is the world. And I'm like, no, this is the internet. Like, this is so detached from like 90% of everyone else's lives. And I guess, I don't know, maybe I think too much of people. I assume that like most journalists would understand that Twitter is not real life, but it seems like they don't know that either.
Well, it's like a pretty compelling illusion because it feels so visceral and so important. But I mean, we actually have some data on this. I think The Atlantic had a good story years ago about how it's sort of exactly what you expect. Twitter is much more liberal than the country at large, much wealthier, much higher educated. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is like I have a basically new and preferable career just because I write and say stuff that the average American is like, yeah, that's interesting. That in some cases you couldn't say in mainstream outlets, like really basic stuff. Like maybe the question of what's a woman is a little bit more complicated than someone who says they're a woman. And I do think the pendulum's swinging back, and mainstream outlets are getting better on stuff like this. But there has been a pretty awesome market opportunity for folks who simply aren't scared of Twitter. And it's dumb to be scared of Twitter because after the fourth or fifth time a bunch of people call you a murderer or a kike or they send you photos of Auschwitz, it's like, why would I pay any attention to this? These people are all insane.
If someone sending you photos of Auschwitz,
it's happened from time to time because I'm Jewish. But why would you? Obviously, if crazy right wingers send you shit like that, to ignore it. But why would I not ignore it when crazy people on my side? You just need to ignore all of it, basically. And I'm not saying they're exactly equivalent, of course, because I agree more. I have, anyway.
When the Supreme Court justice was being confirmed and she didn't want to say what a woman is, she made the comment about, I'm not a biologist. Do you have a take on that, a political take on why that's the case, why it's so difficult for a Supreme Court nominee just to say adult human female?
Because once you give that definition, you'll be seen as saying trans women aren't women. And I guess if you're on the Supreme Court, you might have to rule on that question. But I think like what the Matt Walsh documentary shows is this is a huge weak spot for liberals. And not every attempt at right-wing culture warring has worked. Obviously, gay marriage is no longer getting people riled up. Obviously, bathroom bills aren't getting people riled up. And that, I think, cost them some power in North Carolina. But I think this and the sports thing are just going to work unless progressives can come up with better answers. I don't think, just based on my interactions with Obama liberals, who again, they're always my litmus test for like where the country's at. I do not get emails from Obama liberals that are like, yeah, I'm mad trans people are using the bathroom. It's just not, it's just, whatever. Once every 5 years, there'll be some shit will go down in the bathroom. Shit always goes down in the bathroom. It's not an everyday concern. I get a lot of emails from Obama liberals who are like, it's weird that 10 kids in my daughter's class all came out at trans as once. Right, or this sports stuff is fucking crazy. And this idea that you can just identify your way onto one team or the other, which is the law in some blue states like Connecticut, they're very opposed to that. And I think it's the same deal with like, what is a woman? I think everyone knows you can define man and woman, and to pretend otherwise is not, it doesn't help anyone in the long run. It's not going to help trans people in the long run.
I feel like it really hurts Democrats with moderates, definitely, because it just comes across as cultish to a lot of people. Maybe how are you defining an Obama liberal? I mean, I voted for Obama. Am I an Obama liberal?
You're the Obama liberal.
I just see some of the stuff you see it happening, and you can just feel like the center of the country cringing and going, this is the party I'm supposed to vote with. So
no, I look, and I don't want to overstate it because the median I've said this a million times, but the median Democratic voter is like a, suburban mom, suburban security mom in the Virginia suburbs, or like a nice black church lady in South Carolina. Most of the voters are still, I mean, I guess is what you're saying. They're pretty normal. They're pretty normal politics, but there's this way in which like the radicals just can take up so much of the oxygen in the room despite having unpopular views. But again, there's pushback, right? Because like the Latinx thing is symbolic, but that's a really good example. Like no one anywhere says this, but you do see some groups retreating from it. And I think some of them are also retreating from like the dumb pregnant people, these other like really stupid.
Oh, that's another one.
Yeah.
Especially with the Roe v. Wade.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like,
they dropped that pregnant person thing real quick.
Well, no, I still hear it all the time on like NPR and
I hear some of it. Yeah. Some people dropped it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Every time I hear pregnant person, I think you're really losing the Roe versus Wade.
I unfollowed some people. It's maybe I'm being like a baby or like a reactionary, but it's just like. You can't simultaneously say this issue is incredibly important, which it is, but also we're going to coddle ourselves with this phrasing that like only we understand and which will come across as stilted and weird. Yeah, and then it like gets into really weird shit like uterus haver. You need to defend. I don't get it. I don't want to it's so bad. I don't know.
Really rolls off the tongue very nicely. Exactly. Uterus haver.
Let's go out tonight and try to meet some uterus havers.
Yeah. I've had people tell me that if I were to look more into the literature, that transitioning actually doesn't help people statistically in terms of defeating their depression or the suicide rates. And I was curious because I feel like you've looked into so much of this stuff. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so this is a good chance for me to whore out my stuff, but I've done a couple of recent posts on this on my newsletter, jessesingal.substack.com. The ones I've looked into are the studies on youth transition. And I think until recently, and I might have written this at some point, my basic attitude, and it's funny, Emily Bazelon in this Times Magazine article I really like, otherwise basically says this: for adults, we have a lot of evidence it works. For kids, we're not as sure. I don't really think that's as true as I used to. There's this group at Cornell called the Cornell Inequality. Let me just pull it up. Cornell. So there's this post that everyone passes around called "What Does the Scholarly Research Say About the Effect of Gender Transition on Transgender Well-Being?" Cornell University. Can I drop this in the chat or some shit?
Sure.
Here we go. It's like we looked into all these studies and we separated them out from studies that show transition work and studies that don't. A lot of the ones that do are incredibly weak. So I'm trying to figure out a non-nerdy way to explain this. Like if I take a group of depressed people and I divide them into folks who took antidepressants and folks who didn't, and I said, aha, the ones who took antidepressants have better outcomes. That could be because they're wealthier, they're happier, they're healthier, they're better able to access healthcare. There could be all these confounding variables explaining that difference. And that's why you need to do a much more careful, controlled experiment with like a randomized controlled trial, which it's hard to do with transgender medicine. So my concern is a lot of these studies are incredibly weak, but they're held up as strong because like the right political stance to take is transition works. I still think on balance, for someone with persistent gender dysphoria, it does. And I feel strongly people should be able to access these treatments. But again, I just go back to the idea that like, I think transgender people are sort of being screwed by having their supposed allies overstate the strength of the evidence for these treatments that are very serious treatments.
Right. Has there ever been like a control group or double-blind study with any of like the transition treatments? Because I mean, I guess that'd be pretty hard ethically for them to justify doing, right?
Well, yeah, it would be hard to justify because it's like question begging. It's been decided they work well, even though the evidence is fairly weak. No, I think you could do like some stuff with in clinics with wait lists. You can compare people who get the treatments right away to those who go on wait lists. There's some other opportunities there, but there's like very little attempts to collect good data on this. I think in part because you're going to have a bad time professionally if you like publish a study suggesting it doesn't work. So I just think the research is a mess. I still think on balance it works, but I'm skeptical of the strength of the research.
That plays into a question that I have about ideological capture of these institutions, because is there some overarching institution that you would look to kind of rein in what's going on? You said there's this diversity of clinics. That's not necessarily a good thing. We should be honing in on what kind of procedures work and getting them out to all the clinics, right?
Yeah. Basically, sorry. What's the question?
So
I need more caffeine.
Is there
which body should we trust?
And what is the level of the ideological capture? Like you're saying, if you can't even do a double-blind study that's going to disprove something scientifically, then you basically are ideologically captured.
Yeah, so I think a lot of American Medical Association, American Psychological Association have put out statements that I found pretty crappy. Like I don't mind that they're putting out stuff saying affirming kids is better than conversion therapy. That's fine if that's the choice, but they often overstate the quality of the evidence. They'll do that thing where they include a citation, but then the citation doesn't actually back up the in-text claim. I think unfortunately what's happened is because we're so much more dysfunctionally politically and so much more polarized, that makes everything harder. And what's happened in countries that are a little bit less polarized or a lot less polarized, like Sweden and Finland, is they're sort of national healthcare systems have taken close looks at the data on youth transition and have said this data is not good. It's low quality data. And as a result, they've really scaled back access to puberty blockers and hormones, which is easier to do in a national healthcare setting than it is here, where it's a little bit of the Wild West. So I can't say for sure that they made the right decision, but clearly that tells us something when like major healthcare systems in countries we usually say have better healthcare systems than we do. Because I don't think many people would claim otherwise. If they're expressing caution on this stuff, and there's similar stuff that's happened in the UK and to a lesser extent in France, and one organization that covers psychiatrists in Australia and New Zealand, all of them are saying we need to put on the brakes a little because we just don't really know that these treatments work as well as has been claimed.
It's what's kind of frustrating when we talk to people who are further to the left. Like, I understand this comes up a lot when we talk about, Texas. They tried to make it so that it was child abuse to give any child any sort of transition treatment, which, I disagree with. I think that's way too far. But yeah. But a lot of people's response to that was basically like, well, we just want it to be a decision between parents and doctors, which I want that in the perfect world. But the problem is, it's like, as you said, if no one wants to like do real research on this in America because they're afraid that if they come up with a result that is, quote unquote, anti-trans or affirmative trans model, it doesn't seem like anyone in America is really interested in doing that research and putting that out there.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I'm going to drop this link in for you guys too, to the New York Times Magazine piece, but this latest piece in the Times Magazine that's just a couple weeks old does show that like there's serious debate among the most serious and credible clinicians. Like they don't agree on this, but a lot of them are worried, and they're expressing their views about why they're worried. And the upcoming guidelines for how to work with trans kids are going to include more of a focus on assessment and moving slowly and carefully. So there's there's some movement in the right direction. I'm just worried. I read a lot of quotes from clinicians where I'm just like, I would not trust anyone's kid with this clinician because they don't seem to know what they're doing. And they're sort of like, it comes across as an ideological crusade to like save these kids and to like, it's just not careful clinical work is what I'll say.
Yeah, not just to save these kids, but also like, oh, if you have any question about this, you're, a bigot or you're evil or you're a conservative or Republican or something.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because there's no reason for it to be this politicized. Like I was just writing about this earlier. Like there's no coherent reason folks who agree about abortion or agree about Israel should also agree about youth gender dysphoria. It's a very complicated subject, and it's not an easy left or right wing one. You could just as easily make left wing arguments against youth transition in some cases.
So much of our politics is just whoever takes one side, the other side is like takes the opposition out of obligation, regardless of whether or not the facts are on their side, which is a terrible situation to be in, but it's kind of where we find ourselves these days. Hey, Sitch, do you have more trans stuff to talk about? It looks like. Go ahead.
No, there were two questions in the chat that were aimed at Jesse that I thought were interesting.
I'm happy to take them.
The first one was about Colin P says, "Do you regret your debate with James Lindsay, given his prediction came 100% true?"
That's a good question.
I don't even know what your debate with him was about.
I did this fireside chat or whatever, Unity campfire, Unity
with Brett Weinstein and James Lindsay. Yeah. So I watched this. This was actually very interesting. So, and James Lindsay this is when James Lindsay came out and went like full MAGA. He's voting for President Trump. And you were on the voting for Biden side of the debate. That was actually a very interesting discussion. It sounds like you maybe regret doing it, or?
No, I don't regret. I mean, I just I need to rely on a counterfactual to make this argument. But their argument was, if you want to fight wokeness, you can't vote for Biden. My argument was I think it's a little bit crazy to be a single voter issue on wokeness of all things, because there's so many other differences between the parties. And B, if you don't like wokeness, if you are a single issue voter and wokeness you've decided to make the center of your political identity, which those guys have both done to a certain extent, Trump fuels more craziness on the left than like any other political figure in recent memory. It's almost like sort of similar to the way Obama drove certain conservatives crazy, and it launched like the Tea Party, and it launched a lot of crazy conspiracy theories. I think if you're worried about like overreach and craziness on the left, I think the parallel universe where Trump wins again, and we have 4 more years of just like people making claims about fascism and Trump doing genuinely bad stuff and Trump being a genuinely scary guy, which he is. I think wokeness or whatever you want to call it would have been much worse under those situations. I'm not saying there's nothing weird that Biden's done or that I approve of every aspect of his presidency, but I don't know. I'm sort of, people on Twitter come at me like, oh, you've been proven wrong. It's like, I mean, you can't say that. You don't know what would have happened if Trump had won.
Right.
I think that stuff would have gotten way worse.
You're speaking directly to my heart, Jesse.
Well, yeah, this was actually Sitch's argument before the election. He thought, well, Sitch, you tell him the argument.
Well, I had 2 arguments. One, which proved to be untrue, which was that I thought woke people would turn on Biden, and then the media would have to turn on wokeness to defend Biden. But all the stuff with COVID and the war with Ukraine and all this other stuff kind of just taken over the news cycle. So I don't think any of that happened. But the second argument, which is exactly the same as your argument, was, people, I think, misremember. They think that Donald Trump got elected because of wokeness, which is not really the case. Wokeness was still sort of like brewing on the surface of the internet in 2016. It didn't really explode into the mainstream until Trump was president. And I think a lot of that was because Trump was president, and the Democrats and the left could use wokeness to kind of keep hitting Trump with the racist stick, and also because wokeness depends on the narrative of saying that there's an evil white racist man who's going to become the fascist dictator and take away all your rights, and Trump basically was the perfect avatar for them to point to for that.
No, I mean, I was just going to say and again, I try not to use the term wokeness. I guess we don't have another term for it. It's a fuzzy, often ill-defined thing, but
postmodern neo-Marxist.
Exactly. Cultural Bolshevism. No, there's this like pseudo radicalism thing, mostly among like Hillary voters, where you talk about how the U.S. is just in a death spiral of bigotry and hatred, and things are as bad as they've ever been. And Trump getting elected was perfect for folks who believe that, because they started this narrative that there was this crazy upsurge in white nationalism and white supremacy. I actually think most of what they said about that is false. I think Trump was just elected because he was a Republican. Like, there's no sense of like new white people flooded to Trump. There's no sense of like, I just think a lot of that stuff was exaggerated, but you need that backdrop of like an evil white man if you're going to continue to make that argument. And I think the country's a little bit more complicated than that. And the most important lesson that Democrats have failed to learn is that a lot of non-white groups have shifted toward Trump. I mean, that should tell you something. If you're claiming to be the party of justice and better racial relations, that's horrifying that in 2020 Latino voters shifted toward Trump. It suggests like a real something's very wrong with the Democratic Party. I think that's an easy argument to make because they're so incompetent.
Well, I mean, in 2016, I really think the election was about, my grand theory has always been that everything is the fault of the housing crash, and the fact that it kind of shattered everyone's faith in the American dream. Yeah. And then no one was ever held responsible for that. No one ever really went to jail for that. And I mean, I think that's why people voted for Obama. They felt like he was going to bring the change in. And when the change didn't really materialize, at least in the way that people would perceive it to, you had Clinton versus Trump, and Clinton was kind of this, what are we doing? We're going back to the same thing. It's just the establishment. And Trump was seen as the guy who's going to kick the table over and shake things up. And of course, people are going to vote for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some truth to that, but I also think like every election is decided by 5% of registered voters. Like most of what's going on is Democrats voting for Democrats, Republicans voting for Democrats. Yeah, Republicans.
Right.
And the kingmakers coming in and deciding the election, those center moderates,
enlightened centrists, or the people that don't care enough about anything, that they're just like, oh, I'm not going to figure out who I'm going to vote for till I was going to say, or
the people who have no idea about politics and like the day of the election are like, tell me who to vote for.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Jesse, we talked briefly about the January 6 hearings off air. I'm curious. Sitch and I have a bet for $500, and I think my $500 might be hanging on a thread here. We bet that Trump was going to run. Well, I bet that Trump was going to run in 2024 for president again.
And make it to the first primary.
Yeah, that's the stipulation is he has to be in the Iowa, at least in the Iowa primary. Then I'm $500 richer. Sitch has to hand it over to me. What do you say? How am I $500 poor after these January 6 hearings?
I don't think so. I just think like we're so polarized on this that I don't see people who have stuck with Trump to this point, and those are the ones who will get to decide how far into the primary he gets.
That's true.
I don't really see them changing their mind. There's obviously among the Republican establishment a huge amount of contempt for Trump, as there always has been, and I think it's now contempt mixed with genuine alarm because he tried to fucking steal an election. But what pressure points could any of them apply to prevent him from entering the primary and doing pretty well? I know people were like, depending on your perspective, excited by or scared by that one poll out of New Hampshire where DeSantis was beating him. But I don't know. I still think he's got some juice, and maybe we're making that same mistake where like something that's very salient to us and we're watching this stuff and we're like, holy shit. Again, think of the average Trump voter and the stuff they've already had to overlook to vote for this guy or to keep supporting him. So I think your money's fine. Maybe I'll
really.
Well, my bet. I mean, I made this bet way before these hearings ever occurred because it had nothing to do with that. It was just I think Trump is going to have 4 years of not having media hate him and everyone yell at him and be like, I'm very rich and I get to now spend my time sitting around in Florida, doing whatever I want, and this is much better than being president. And I think he's just going to be like, nah, fuck
Tell him how ridiculous that is.
I think it's slightly ridiculous only because Trump has such a broken soul and he always has to pursue something. Like, what's he going to do? He's going to play golf. He's going to read. Sure. I'm skeptical of that.
I don't know what did he do before he was president.
He sought attention. He did reality shows. He called into Howard Stern. I think that's why I'm skeptical. I just can't imagine him ever being satisfied not seeking the limelight.
Every caddy that meets him on the golf course is going to say, "They stole it from you, President."
Yeah, exactly.
And say he's not going to be able to take that. He's just going to. It's like Jesse's right. That's the other thing. He thinks something was
taken from him, and a lot of his supporters do, which is all the more reason to.
Yeah.
I don't want to. We could definitely be wrong about this. I've seen nothing in his personality to suggest he wouldn't run again.
We shall see.
It's going to suck so badly.
He said, I've heard him say, and he's been pretty strongly whenever he does a rally saying, hinting that he's going to run. For the first time, I heard him say, "If I run." Which made me think,
interesting.
Well, maybe the January 6 hearings are having an effect on him. I've never heard him say that before. And immediately I thought, oh, there goes my $500. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I also... go ahead.
There's a story everyone's making a big deal about how DeSantis is not going to ask Trump for his blessing for his election. They're saying this is a big fuck you to Trump from DeSantis.
Really?
So interesting. Huh.
What do you think is going to happen on the Democratic side? Do you think?
Oh God,
Biden. I heard today Biden. There was a thing with Kamala Harris. She said Biden is definitely running, and she's running as his running mate. So
that will be so insane if Biden runs again.
I mean,
Gavin Newsom's obviously in. Who else?
It seems like a pretty thin bench. I haven't been following it that closely.
Okay.
I do think sometimes people forget how much can happen in like the third year of a presidency.
Yes.
I was thinking about like Obama, who got a disastrous 2010 midterm, rise of the Tea Party, and then he was reelected in 2012 easily. Obviously, Biden is not Obama, unfortunately. I don't know how they could really do better than Biden, which is scary to say, but we're going to have, assuming he runs, you're going to have a contentious Democratic primary where the incumbent loses. I think it would be best. I would say it'd be best for him to step down, but Harris would be a disaster on the national stage. She's never been popular. She's a terrible. I just remember I was on this listserv with just these ridiculous arguments about Kamala Harris that just showed how toxic it would be because like, it really was like, oh, you're saying a black woman shouldn't be president. It's like, no, I'm saying that one sucks as a politician and shouldn't be.
Yeah, she has the charisma of like a dead fish. Whenever you hear her talk,
it's really bad.
That is an uncomfortable situation because even if Biden steps down and says he's not going to run again and Harris runs in the primary and loses, oh, that's embarrassing. That's
although at
totally
that point I would want her to
embarrassing.
lose because I have no faith in her ability to win. I'd want her to lose to Newsom or Mayor Pete or whatever. We just need better, like younger. I don't know. I don't know where like the youthful energy with realistic national prospects
Gavin
are.
Newsom's not that.
No.
He's not a crypt keeper.
No.
He's a pretty young guy.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
I mean, they tried to recall him in California, but
Yeah.
Someone
it
in the
happens.
chat said that you had a bad take on Gamergate. They accused you of having a bad Gamergate. What's your Gamergate take?
We should definitely relitigate that. I think
Yes.
we might do a whole. Katie, my co-host, knows nothing about Gamergate. Also, everyone should check out the latest Bill Maher show. I don't usually watch it. Katie Herzog was on it. My co-host, she was good.
Yes.
I saw part of it. I saw a couple clips. Yeah.
Yeah, she's solid. She's an okay person. We might just do a big episode of the show where we revisit Gamergate because I find it to be so. I still think there were a lot of weirdos in Gamergate who were fixated on dumb shit. I also think some of the coverage of it, that's like every Gamergater hates women, every Gamergater harasses people. I had like some people in Gamergate email me and we had respectful disagreements. So I think it was this thing where a lot of dilettantes who don't know anything about online culture were like just latched onto it because it was the best thing that ever happened to them. This like easy, good versus evil controversy. A lot of the coverage was horrible and stupid, and it might be worth revisiting some of it. Also, it turned out that some of the anti-Gamergate people, as I later found out, were like complete sociopaths, and they made this their life's mission to fight this dumb online battle. I think what bothers me the most of all are these headlines that'll be like, I'm making this one up, but a lot in the vein of the fact that Trump is even thinking of running again proves that Gamergate is still with us. It's just like Gamergate explains everything. It's the most important thing that ever happened. There'd been before Gamergate, women had a great time on the internet. There was no harassment. It's just Gamergate discourse is dumb, and it might be good for us to cover on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, like Zoe Quinn, the main target turned out to be a sociopath. I think Brianna Wu, maybe she's not a sociopath, but she ended up being like an idiot.
I had one of my best moments on Twitter with Brianna Wu.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was that?
Really?
Let me pull it up right here. Single receipts. Brianna Wu said,
Sitch has a video on Gamergate. I don't know if you know that, but it's like one of the most popular videos. I watched it a long time ago.
I don't remember it. It was like the cafeteria table one.
Right? Yes. Yeah.
Everyone remembers my analogy.
Brianna Wu said in March of 2021, I have my own Jesse Singal stories I've never shared publicly.
I remember
One day I
this.
will, and I have
this.
receipts. I don't know how many sources have to talk about wildly unethical behavior before credible journalists decide not to be associated with someone. So as soon as I saw that, I screenshotted it and I said, Brianna should share these stories immediately. I think it's really important to get to the bottom of this. And it's been a year and 3 months now. She never released the receipts, which sucks because I'm still out here causing all this harm, hurting all these people. And she could have ended it. She had the receipts.
Listen, Jesse, you can break the news on our show. We know that you and Brianna Wu colluded on her Moonrock defense system. Okay?
Yes, the Moonrock. Someone said in chat, lol, Revolution 60. That was like her shitty game.
Yes.
Oh, God. She's the worst. But that's the thing, though. Like, she's clearly not a good person, and she makes shit up, and she's just not credible in any way, not respected as a game designer. But because, like, journalists aren't, it's not just they're lazy, they're legitimately busy. And if you're this poor schmuck of a journalist who has to write 15 stories a week and someone's like, we need you to do something on Gamergate, you'll just poke around on Twitter for 5 minutes and be like, well, Brianna Wu appears to be the victim, so I'm going to call up Brianna Wu and get a quote. But no one actually it does take a lot of time journalists legit don't have to understand, like, maybe there's people who, are victims and that they were harassed, but victims can also be bad people. And for example,
the way that I view Gamergate, if you're going to do like a big long thing on it, is that, I mean, you have to also remember Gamergate happened before people had a word for wokeness or even really understood what wokeness was or social justice warriors, any of that stuff. This was like really like I guess it was the second.
Social justice warriors was already in the vernacular, but SJWs.
Not really. It kind of really came out after Gamergate, if I recall correctly. Okay. I mean, Atheism Plus was like really the first salvo, but that was kind of like no one cared about that, so no one knew about it.
Yeah.
So Gamergate was really like the first, in my mind, SJW salvo against like something mainstream. Right. And what I think happened was, you had on all these, video game forums, like a tiny minority of people were talking about this Zoe Quinn drama, the accusation that she, slept around to get positive reviews on her video game. And like no one really cared or knew about this really because it's some tiny story. And then there's this weird backlash where all these gaming sites shut down conversations about this, and all these articles come out defending Zoe Quinn and basically calling all gamers sexist. And it has this total Streisand effect where all these people are like, I don't even know what the fuck people are talking about, but if they're covering it up, it must be true. Yeah. And also people just react to, being called sexist. I'm like, what do you mean sexist? I play video games. I'm not sexist.
Yeah.
And I think it led to this massive backlash, but since it was really before people had a good concept of wokeness, they didn't really know what to sort of circle their wagons around. They didn't really know how to fight this charge. And so I think a lot of people in Gamergate they're worried that we have to define ourselves before, we're defined. And I think they landed on ethics in gaming journalism, which to me is kind of a ludicrous thing anyway, because there's never been ethics in gaming journalism. But
yeah. By the way, I'm looking at the chat, and you do have a lot of people who are mad that you criticize Trump. They're saying you have Trump derangements.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But
is that our chat that you're looking at?
I pulled up the YouTube and I turned off the audio.
Oh, okay.
YouTube audio.
You got it.
It's different from the
Oh yeah, no, I'm accused of having a full blown TDS. But
it was like a war in our chat on Sunday. When we were covering the January 6th hearings. But go ahead, Gamergate.
Well, no, I just wanted to finish to say that.
Yeah, sorry.
It's to me, and I remember seeing this happen with Gamergate 2. You had Breitbart was like the only publication to really defend Gamergaters. And I'm like, wow, it's very obvious that they were trying to use Gamergate to woo young people over to supporting them and all this other stuff. And to me, that's really what Gamergate was about, was just this group of people being attacked as sexist and kind of lashing out back against it for the first time. And all the Zoe Quinn stuff didn't really matter. All the ethics and gaming journalism stuff, all that stuff was kind of secondary to what was really happening.
I think that was part of it. I'll keep making this point forever. I do think my views have changed on some of the coverage of it and some of the anti-Gamergate figures. It's very weird if your concern is the way big companies or big outlets manipulate people and manipulate gamers and don't, have a consumer rights approach. There's stuff to look into there and stuff to advocate on, but it doesn't really have much to do with tiny indie developers. And it seemed like a lot of this was some of this, not all of it, some of it was that people were mad about walking simulators, that they exist. There was some of that. I remember I was in Kotaku in Action. That was what I always found a little bit misguided of it. It's it seemed like there was this real obsession with folks like Zoe Quinn, who we now know is an imperfect character. And
to put it mildly, but yes.
But if you want to direct that energy, there's all kinds of corruption going on with the way big journalism, gaming journalism outlets act. But it's not really that. The indie scene is so small. It's a version. Yeah, it's a version of when two online liberal journalists focus on tiny shit that most people haven't even heard of.
Well, I think if Gamergate happened in 2016, 2017 instead of 2014, I think it would have been completely different, because I think everyone would have just focused. The problem with Gamergate is everyone had the sense that something was wrong, but they didn't really know what to project that wrongness onto. And I think that's why a lot of it turned into walking simulators and gaming journalism and Zoe Quinn. Where if it happened 2016, 2017, people would have basically projected the energy towards wokeness and social justice warriors and all that stuff.
What is that walking simulator? What do you guys mean when you say that?
It's like Gone Home or Firewatch, these games where you just walk around and experience emotions and story happens.
And look at
and read the screen.
Firewatch and Gone Home, I really actually love both of them. I'm not. Okay.
Stanley Parable is a fantastic.
Stanley Parable is one of the most incredible. If you want to talk about so much of this game has an amazing plot, or it really introduces morality in an interesting way, all that shit is usually bullshit, because morality in games is usually your good meter went up 1 point because you saved the orphan instead of eating him, which is just very shallow. But Stanley Parable actually did different things with storytelling and plot in a mind-melting way I'd never seen before. And I want to play this sort of new remastered one, which I haven't yet.
Yeah, Stanley Parable is fantastic.
I'm more of the games where you do the shooting and the killing, and
I'm getting into Elden Ring, which is the first like
Nice.
big time-consuming game I played in a while. So
Right.
I'm getting back into that. But I'm usually more of like a roguelite, Slay the Spire, Dead Cells. shit
Oh,
like
I
that.
love
It's
Slay the
just-
Spire.
Yeah, it's just as you get older, I don't know. I feel like I'll look at the Steam thing. It's like you've spent 100 hours on this. I'll just feel like a shit
Oh,
person.
I
My
know,
friends are
right?
like having kids and raising families and shit.
Listen, you're like, yeah, but I've got up to max on Slay the Spire, okay? So
Exactly.
I've got let's look what I got to show for it.
Sorry, I can't come to your kid's fucking birthday party. I have
Yeah.
to. I got a new virtual trading card. It's hard for me to even explain it to you, but I promise you, it's important.
Have you played Hades? It's another great roguelike.
Hades, I got two. It was such a fucking perfectly calibrated game. I was in the beta, and I've like barely played it since the official release because it was just too good, and I could tell it would. Actually, I'm curious about that. I'm gonna see.
You were afraid it. You were like, this is too.
It's too
addictive.
good. It was like
Yeah.
heroin. Like I can't do heroin because I've heard heroin is really fun.
yeah,
Hades,
no,
You're right.
that's,
No, you're so right. I had the exact same experience with Hades. Only I actually took their heroin.
Hades was well, maybe it wasn't that bad. This is very entertaining for everyone watching. For me to check my.
Let's
Steam
let's
page.
talk a little.
I'm curious what your Steam hours are for Hades and Slay the
Well,
Spire.
while he's looking that up, Sitch, let's talk a little bit about why.
You know what?
How
Hades
this
is only
came
25
together.
hours, but I
Oh,
think
wow,
I just
that's
realized
nothing.
how much. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
What? Let's. How did Sitch? So there's a YouTuber goes by the name of Academic Agent. We lovingly, with the utmost respect, call him Quackademic Agent, and he's gone at us a little bit on YouTube, and we've had some fun. But Sitch, you were going back and forth with him on Twitter for a few days, and Jesse chimed in. I think he retweeted one of the tweets or something and asked to be informed about it.
But then you don't remember, so I guess you don't care. But
I want to be reminded. This sounds like it was very exciting.
he tweeted out something like, "If I ever meet Sitch in person, I'm gonna knock him out."
Oh yeah.
And then you retweet it, and you're like, "I'm always interested in like YouTube drama that leads to physical, threats of physical violence or
Yeah.
something." So,
Yes.
Wait, let me see what I
Do-
said. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So
do you care? I mean, I feel like I don't care, but if you, I
Actually,
don't really want to
did
talk
he ever
about.
try to
I
punch
don't.
you? What
I'm just trying to stir the pot here a little bit,
No.
Jesse. We have gone back and forth with Quackademic Agent over various things. So he's done a live stream slandering my good friend and co-host PSA Sitch. So it seems to be dying down a bit here, but I just thought
Let's restart it. We don't want
Let's
to die
restart
down.
it.
Let's,
Yeah, no, he did
say,
not.
talk some shit, kick some shit.
So he lives in Britbong land, far away from me. So the chances of us ever
What's
meeting
his
and getting
address?
into a fist
What's his
fight.
street address?
No, we're not doxing him, Jesse. Come
We're
on.
not
This
Okay, I
is,
found it. It's 513
No, Jesse.
There you go.
British
listen.
Boulevard.
Oh, Jesse. He automatically he takes it up to like DEFCON 5.
I know.
Wait, what's his name on Twitter? I do want to just look him up.
OG Roland Rat is his Twitter
That's
name.
not a real OG. ROL.
OG Roland Rat.
Yes.
Roland Rat.
Roland, yeah, like
the
name
original
Roland.
Roland Rat. Well, I mean, I don't want to be elitist, but is it worth you getting in a fight with someone with 6,000 followers?
Oh
well,
my God.
He keeps okay, so
This guy is super
First of
into
all, that is
elite
very
theory,
elitist.
Jesse.
Secondly,
What you
yeah,
just said is
secondly.
amazingly hilarious.
secondly, and he's very into elite theory, which is funny that you bring that up.
Wait,
but,
the 10 Theses. Oh, he's like a new right weirdo.
he's like a neo-reactionary guy.
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, he keeps part of the reason his Twitter following is I think that low is he keeps changing his Twitter handle because he'll start saying like really anti-Semitic or crazy shit, and then he deletes it all and then changes his Twitter name. So
This guy looks like such a. I should not have talked shit about this guy because he actually scares me. I'm sorry. The original Roland Rat. Oh God.
when we re-upload this, we'll cut this part out.
I don't
You.
think
No,
you should
don't
be.
keep it.
I don't think you should be scared of him. He's.
I'm not actually scared of these.
I think
fucking
he's a-
cowards. Oh yeah, I found anti-Semitism within like the first.
Oh really?
Yeah, he like literally. He's screw. Oh God.
Still.
He will deny that it is anti-Semitic, and I think he was actually an academic. I think he was a professor, and his students came after him and canceled him, and I think he's had kind of a backlash from that. But he's written a book. He's got I think a book on morality or something like that. So
This is I've noticed this. There's a history podcaster who I love who went to a very dark place, unfortunately, and is becoming a reactionary. But sporadic reminder that we are supposed to believe 34 more million people voted in 2020 than 2016. Like that. I'm just asking questions. Like maybe they just made up 34 million votes. It's like, no, Trump was really unpopular. Like a lot of people voted against Trump. It's weird that they're in such a bubble they can't even understand that. I guess I'm going to be accused of TDS in your chat, but that's okay.
Well, no, it's true. I agree. One of the reasons why I'm interested in the January 6 hearings is they're actually talking about, just the Justice Department did do some digging into what was going on. They didn't just say, "Oh, just forget about it."
Yeah.
So I found it. I found the tweet. I haven't looked at his Twitter timeline forever. He says the USA going hard Christian will be one potential way to overcome their racial issues, since it can be shared by whites, blacks, and Hispanics. Naturally, this leaves the 2% out, which is why they have done everything humanly possible to prevent this from happening.
Did he have like 3 parentheses around 2%?
He did not. He did not have the echo quotes, but so there you go.
How would he even what would his plausible deniability be there if someone asked him?
Who the fuck knows? I don't know. When we were arguing on Twitter, the thing that led to the punch comment was he said like, oh, do you deny that there's Jewish sectional interest in America? And I kept saying like, what does that mean? Like define Jewish sectional interest. And then he just got so enraged that I didn't know what Jewish sectional interest was and refused to tell me what it was.
Sitch was trying to debate him on the JQ, and he was getting really upset.
That's good. That. We need more open conversation about the JQ. Right. Sitch's. The other thing is like anyone who knows anything about like academic and intellectual communities, there are no two groups that hate each other more than Jewish leftists and Jewish liberals. Like they go after each other. Like
really,
the idea that we're all part of the same. It's very crazy.
That is a ridiculous take.
Well, I mean, you got Jewish leftists, Jewish liberals, and then you have very conservatives.
Jews.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm saying you don't even need to go to like Jews disagree on Israel in the States. They disagree on like anyway. I'm starting to suspect we can't trust OG Roland, the guy with the rat mask on his profile.
You could be correct. You could be correct. So I think I should ask should I ask the 3 questions?
Yeah, before we wrap up, Jesse seems definitely based enough to do all 3 of them. So
okay, well we'll see. The first question is, do you think you could defeat a horse-sized duck in a fight?
No, I'm that weird combination where I'm 6'3", 230.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Aren't you like 6'3"? Jeez,
I didn't know you were so giant.
No, I'm incredibly weak. I was home a couple days ago. My niece, who is 5, was like playfully punching me in the hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, she's a cute kid. And I was like, okay, you got to stop. You're really hurting me. And I started crying.
Jesse.
Could you at least ride the horse-sized duck? I mean, they fly, right? I mean,
yeah.
If they flew. Okay, my honest answer to this is yes. If it flew, I would try to ride it.
Okay.
This is a safe space.
You got to start lifting some weights, Justin.
Someone asked in the chat, so why is circumcision legal in America? As part of the JQ question, I guess.
What?
Jesus Christ.
There you go.
All right, what are the other 2 questions?
Second question is, are owls birds?
Yeah. Is this? Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, good. That was very quick.
Because I don't want to ask you to explain.
It's a timed question, and your response was very prompt.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. People think it's a trick question when it's not. So I guess that's the trick.
The last one you can pass on because it's about pornography. So obviously,
not only is it about pornography,
which only makes me more eager to.
It's a little racy.
It's about pornographic consumption habits.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. The third question.
I've already ruined my career with this.
Yes. There you go. The third question is, when you or if you were to ever watch porn, do you view it as if it's like individuals that you're spying on that are not you, or do you place yourself into it like as if you were an actor in the scene?
More the latter, because I actually find it weird to imagine like spying on someone.
Okay.
Just because I think about how little anyone else would want to see me have sex. It's hard for me to be like. I feel like people would pay to go into a theater. And you see me having sex, but you have to pay money to have a curtain come down over it. I think that could be a good business model.
We actually did a
go.
poll on this, and I think it was about 500 respondents, and it was about 80% did the POV. I was surprised that it was 20%.
It was like 70-30, I thought.
Really? I thought it was like 79. It was closer to 80.
Okay, maybe it was 80, yeah. 80% POV, 20% voyeurs.
I was surprised it is 20% voyeurs, though. I thought, really? Okay.
Yeah, well,
that's pretty high.
The way you phrased it made it sound like, yeah.
Well, I mean, how else to phrase it, right?
Well, okay. Do you get more? I think there'd be a way to phrase it where you could like sift out the perverts better. You could say, is it more you imagine yourself in the scene, or you're just attracted by seeing these naked bodies? Versus,
I see what you're saying. Right. I understand.
Which do you imagine you are hiding in the closet, or something that's not weird? Yeah.
Well, I don't know, because the last person we asked this, it's funny. They said that they feel like they're voyeuristically watching because like the things that are going on in the porn are perverted, so they would be more perverted to think they were participating in it.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this. Maybe this will. I don't know if this will. So people are asking in the chat if I'm a soy boy, which I think is a good question. I'm curious.
I mean, you got beat up by a 5-year-old.
I did get beat up by my 5-year-old niece. Fuck you, Reddit. I can't do like weird porn. I don't know. I'm pretty vanilla with that stuff.
I see. No stepsister getting stuck in the washing machine.
What's that? What is that?
You don't know if there's like, oh my god, it's like
you guys are into way weirder shit.
How do you not know about? There's like this whole genre.
I only know about it, Jesse. I'm not into it.
Family members getting stuck in like positions and then having sex. You don't know about? It's like a big meme. How do you not know about
stuck in the washing machine?
Yeah, like, oh, I'm stuck in the washing machine. Help me out. It's like, oh, I'll help you out of the washing machine
with my dick.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's funny because so many of my friends are mostly not online, and they think I'm way too online. But then in the presence of you two, it's like there's whole other levels of online.
Yeah, you're like a baby over here. Jeez, all right.
I'm a baby.
That's fine. That's fine.
Anyway.
Listen, you play Slay the Spire. What's your? I don't. You could. Okay, maybe this would actually be the most contentious question. What's your most hours played game on Steam?
Well, here's the thing. I think it's right now. First of all, it's not going to be like true gamer level because I am old and have other.
That's true.
Slay the Spire. Oh my god, 213 hours. Given how shitty I am at Slay the Spire, that's really bad. Let me just check Dead Cells.
213 hours. Wow.
For how little I've accomplished in that game, it's very bad. Dead Cells.
Well, no, I think I played like close to 5,000 hours on some games.
Like, what game?
Yeah. When I was younger.
Yeah, definitely.
What if you played 5,000 hours? That's a shitload.
I used to play this game Warhawk on PS3. I think I easily did 5,000 hours on that game.
I think I'm like in the life stage where I'll probably never play another game 4-digit. So like for me, 200 hours is a shitload. For me, I thought I'd played Hades a lot. 25 hours is nothing. So we all get a little bit old, a little bit. We slow down. We're less able to spy on people having sex. It's just getting older.
It happens.
I have so many. I was a video game reviewer, columnist for the Boston Globe, and I have all these fucking. It was cool. You could just get whatever game you wanted and then write a shitty column about it. But I'm just realizing I have so many. Not to brag, but I have so many games I've barely played.
Look at this guy over here.
Look at this guy.
Bragging about his Steam library over here.
Who else but an alpha would brag about his Steam library?
Of course. How many games do you have in your Steam? I've got over 2,000 Steam games.
Westerado Double Barreled. I don't even know what that is. Anyway, yes, I can tell your audience is very impressed by
200. I have more hours on Slay the Spire than you. So
how many hours do you have on Slay the Spire?
It's in the 300 range.
Slay the Spire is fucking brilliant. It's just so.
It's really good. Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for like developers who can just take very basic formulas, very repetitive formulas, and just make them irresistible. Because I couldn't do that.
Did you play? What was it called? Blanking on the name.
Yeah, what's the name, Sitch?
What's the name?
What's the game? Come on.
It's like it's a roguelite card deck builder game, but you're stuck in a cabin with like a crazy guy.
I started to play that. It was so good. It's called. This was like the indie critics' darling game from last year. Oh, I played like 10 hours of it. I need to finish it. Everyone loves it. What the fuck was it?
Inscription.
Called? Inscription. Yes, with the Y. SCRY.
Yes, Inscription with the Y. Yes.
Did you play that all the way through?
Yeah. It's prepare to be disappointed.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's how I enter most new life experiences.
Right.
So
The game is broken into 3 parts. The first part is so amazing. One of the most. But then there's the rest of 2/3 of the game is you're not in a cabin.
You actually just have to read an essay about Gamergate.
Yeah, basically.
Literally, it won't let you close out or do anything else on your computer.
Right. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I played all the way through, but the second and third parts of the game are just nowhere near as good as the first. So
too bad.
There was be cautious.
One game that I highly recommend that isn't getting the love it deserves that I want to shout out. Of course, now I can't remember the fucking name. It was called
So Good. Such a good game.
No, so it's basically what's like one of the first video games of all time, like Space Invaders. It's that, but you're a wizard. Maybe someone in the chat will know. It's $1 and it's so addictive. You're a wizard running around the bottom. Oh, it has like Archangel in the name, or Patrick's Parabox is so good. That's a puzzle game that people should play too. That's what I've been playing recently. Good job, Elm. Does anyone in the fucking chat? What are you guys here for? If you're not gamers,
it's like Space Invaders.
Seraphim. It has Seraphim in the name. Let me find it. Seraphim game, dude. It's so. I had to stop. No, not War of the Seraphim. Oh man, this is not very compelling content.
Help him out here. Is he a true gamer? Is anyone in chat a true gamer? I guess not.
Dude, I thought you guys were true gamers.
Vampire Survivors? No.
The history
podcaster, I don't want to talk shit, but I think his Twitter account is weird. His name is Martyr Made. He did an amazing miniseries called God Socialist about the Jim Jones situation. Seraph's Last Stand. Thank you, Stockhausen. And Martyr Made is an example of someone who I'm sure he would not like me saying this, but I feel like Twitter's melted his brain a little bit. I love his podcast. He's like God Socialist. Everyone should listen to, but he's becoming a conspiracy theorist.
He's a socialist? You said how is
no. The name of his show, his show is called Martyr Made, and then he'll do these miniseries. Like I'm halfway through one on the history of Zionism. That's very interesting, but the one he did on the Jim Jones temple, this horrible mass suicide, was called God Socialist. It was like 4 or 5 episodes.
Yeah, we just talked about that. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I watched the
not many people know that was a socialist situation. The whole Kool-Aid thing came out of Jim Jones.
Well, it's interesting because he's this guy who was a psychopath and a narcissist, but he actually did like legitimately good civil rights work in Indianapolis, and he would like refuse to have anything to do with segregated churches. So he was this inspiring guy, but he had these crazy demons. Anyway, Martyr Made is excellent. I do recommend the podcast. It's just frustrating to see someone who like, this was a holy shit moment for me discovering this podcast. And then I bet people have the same thing with me, where they hopefully they like my magazine work. Then they see what a raging douchebag I am on Twitter. And it's like, maybe I can't trust this guy's writing. So
that's everyone though. You're like, oh, I really like this guy's YouTube content. And then you look at their Twitter and you go, oh my God.
Yeah.
Are you still friendly with James Lindsay? Because you did the debate with him.
Yeah, we were never friendly. I think he's unfortunately gone a little bit off the deep end, and I think he's an example of someone who I do think if you like get into politics without much of a background in politics and like you're suddenly very invested in it because you were canceled or mad about the woke people, it can sometimes lead you bad places. And I think oftentimes he just acts like a real asshole on Twitter, and I don't know, I don't like that.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate because I don't know if you've looked into CRT at all, but I think that James Lindsay's pretty spot on when it comes to like him analyzing, the CRT and sort of like this weird leftist academic literature. But the problem is that he, in my opinion, I think the problem is that he uses that same lens that he uses to interpret that stuff to kind of interpret the rest of the world. Yeah. And so he kind of sees the rest of the world falling into that conspiratorial lens, which has led him to kind of going down these rabbit holes, which I don't think are true. And then also it's sad because I think in terms of like, anti-wokeness, I think it's important that we have academics who can kind of criticize the movement and criticize the academic literature. And James Lindsay could have basically positioned himself to be that guy, but now he can't because he's just so wild on Twitter that no one would ever take him seriously outside of, certain circles.
Yeah, and I think also, I just think anyone who if you make being against anything the center of your persona and the center of your ambitions, you're going to go fucking crazy, because that can't be the whole thing. Just being opposed to something, whatever that thing is. And yeah, I think there's perfectly reasonable ways to critique the stuff. Katie and I on our podcast, we both did a whole episode about how fucking crazy white fragility is. And she interviewed someone who'd been through a training with Robin DiAngelo. So we're obviously, this was before it became like, now it's like everyone's like, yeah, white, or a lot of people are now feel open to criticize it. At the time, that wasn't the case. So I'm not opposed to criticizing this shit. And I think a lot of it's bad and runs contrary to the goal of improving race relations and ending racism. But if you make it your own only thing and you decide that wokeness is this vast evil conspiracy and that we need to fight by any means necessary, you're going to go to the bad place.
Sure. Well, I mean, and I'll defend James a little bit in that he's always been very staunch in defending liberalism against the far right that wants to throw liberalism away. That they make this argument that liberalism inherently leads to communism, which I think is a very dangerous road to travel down, and he's always been very against that.
Well, but then he supported. Maybe I'm being too reductionist about this, but I don't think you can be in favor of liberalism and be a liberal and then support Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump.
Well, it's because he assumes that like. It's because he assumes that the way that a lot of the academic literature he's reading is basically manifesting in the real world, and he thinks that the leaders are doing this stuff intentionally, which I don't think so. I think the majority of people that promote woke stuff have no idea what it is or any of the academic literature, and it's just reaction to, the right, or just the ability to call people on the right racist, and they're not really following any of the things that he's following, but he's assuming they're following it. And so through that lens, he sees Donald Trump as like the savior to prevent, socialism from taking over.
Jesse, what are you basing that Donald Trump is predisposed towards authoritarianism on? Because everything Donald Trump did, I feel like was mischaracterized by the media in ways that I never really bought into that authoritarian narrative. Now that the January 6 hearings are coming out, I feel like I'm a little more open to that idea. But before that, they would just make shit up about Trump. So,
I think his communication style, I think, was sort of classic would-be strongman. I think he was never going to become a strongman because we do have fairly strong institutions retaining him. But I think he has a lot in common in his disposition with folks like Putin and Erdogan. And I'm not the first to say this. I think he admires them in a sense. And a lot of the talk of like America being this like totally dark, destroyed place, and he's the only one who can save it. I think there's a lot of authoritarianism in him. And I also think like when I think about what I think people exaggerated when he would like, look, it's shitty that he called out individual journalists on Twitter, but shit happens on Twitter and it doesn't usually result in any real world violence. But a lot of like his fixation on negative press attention is something that authoritarians do, like in really trying to go after the press in that way. That doesn't mean all the coverage of him was fair, but no, I think there was some deranged coverage of Trump, but I do view him as someone who in different circumstances would have been an authoritarian figure. And like you said, we now know that he really did. He did try to overthrow an election. So.
Going after the press like he did, I really feel hurt him in the election, because obviously, there's like the Hunter Biden story that was effectively buried. He went to war with the press and it did. I'm sure it helped him with the base, but I'm not sure that it helped him with moderates who ultimately decide the election. Do you have a take on that?
I'm not sure I do. I think one thing that I think those of us who like watch a lot of politics and follow it closely sometimes overestimate how much it matters, like whether Trump said this versus that. And we imagine that a lot of people are reacting and making voting decisions based on that. When I just think it's like locked in for most people, and most people don't follow this stuff very closely at all.
Well,
I do think that
it is locked in for most people, but the election is decided by the moderates, the people who will vote either way. And those people, they obviously are swayed by what goes on in the press to some extent. And they just completely destroyed him in the press over and over again. He also, I don't know if you remember, but he boycotted the White House press corps dinner. Correspondence dinner. And I often wonder if he if he didn't do that and, you know, played a little more to the press in ways that weren't just, you know, your public enemy number one, if things might have been different for him.
Yeah. I'm just not sure that many people follow it that closely. Like the entire liberal press establishment called him a threat to democracy. I don't think the average person felt that strongly one way or another about that. I think they voted on things like, you know, gut instincts about his disposition. Was he presidential? The economy, COVID. I do think it was widely understood that his response to COVID was not good and that he didn't take it seriously. And I also think like there was a big surge of 2020 voters who were liberal-ish, who were just disgusted by Trump as a dude and turned out for that reason. But you could be right. This is like very far from my area of expertise.
CNN called. You couldn't watch CNN for 5 minutes without some pundit saying Trump praised neo-Nazis. That was like a meme over and over and over again on CNN. And I don't anyone who believes that is gonna. There's no way you're voting for Trump. Come on.
Yeah, but I don't think it's. I don't think people who don't believe it and who don't trust the media would be swayed by it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, that was part of the problem. Was, and it seemed to me that the media, you know, as soon as Trump entered the race, you know, the media was like, "Oh, this is a joke. He's not gonna run. He's not gonna win." Blah 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 blah. And then he had this very, you know, "fuck you" attitude to the media and to basically everyone. And that's why people, I think, liked him and elected him in the first place.
Yeah,
was because of that attitude. And I don't know. It feels almost like that attitude of telling the media to fuck off kind of drove them insane that he won, and they just like there's so much like criticism that you can levy at Trump that's valid, but it seems like the media just really did develop TDS, or they really did just want to frame everything he was doing in the worst possible way imaginable. I mean, even the littlest things, you know, they like there's the famous picture of him feeding the fish, and they're like, look at Donald Trump's an idiot. He doesn't even know how to feed the fish in Japan. Like just every little thing that they would just, you know, blow up. And it really, I think it just really made people lose faith in a lot of our journalist institutions in this country, which is very dangerous.
I do too. I think the two sides fed off one another. I mean, remember one of the first things that happened after he was inaugurated was that ridiculous thing with the biggest crowd ever.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sending Sean Spicer to I mean,
the biggest crowd.
It was surreal. And that was it's obviously not as important about lying about like weapons of mass destruction, but it's different and more unusual and it's weirder.
Yeah.
And it was going to get the attention of the media. But that, you know, I agree with you. I think some of it was overstated. I think some of the Russia stuff was overstated, although that's really an area I don't know much about. But I don't think. Look, I have. I'm on Substack and have this podcast largely because I'm not happy with how the media has acquitted itself in recent years, and this is part of it. But any, I should probably roll out. I'm doing dinner thing with my dad and my brother. But anyone else? Any other outstanding questions? Anyone want to call
look at this? You're so you're so great.
You know, just the regular. Just is Jesse woke to the tomboy question? How do you feel about tomboy abs?
Dude, is this another thing where I'm just not online enough to get it? Fuck, what are tomboy abs? You know, I definitely don't have tomboy ads. I can say that.
Well, you're not tomboy. You're a boy. Like a, you know,
as far as
girl,
sexy girl abs. Are you for or against? I mean, I don't see how anyone could be against like sexy abs. But...
Oh, like visible abs on a woman?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a buff woman with, you know, good abs. Find it attractive.
I think, you know what, this might be the similar thing to like, I actually don't think for women it's that important for a guy to have a six-pack, although that's a self-serving opinion for me. It's definitely not important for me.
Think I completely disagree. I completely disagree with you, Jesse. The six-pack is the aphrodisiac for women. So
exactly.
Keep lying to yourself.
As you get into your mid to late 30s, you
definitely I know.
Like,
it's
women
tough.
are obsessed with six-packs. Yeah. I guess I'm indifferent about female.
There you go.
Okay.
Six packs.
At least you're consistent.
Okay.
I'm consistent. I'm always moderate in all things.
Right.
Well, that's good. It was great having you on. Thanks for coming.
Yeah,
guys. Thank you very much. Let's do it again sometime. I appreciate it.
Definitely.
Take care.
Bye. See you later.
Bye-bye. All right. That was fun.
Awesome. Yeah. That was fun.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.